Good afternoon, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to our second installment of the Innovation Roadmap Speaker Series, which is a new series that we launched this fall. And the series is all about bringing back alumni who are doing interesting things with their lives that involve entrepreneurship, whether they happen to have started a company or they're working in an ongoing concern or a nonprofit. It's all about the entrepreneurial mindset and their path. And we really hope that you see yourselves a little bit in each of these speakers' paths and can sort of mine their experience to see what resonates for you. So we're delighted to welcome Kristin Berman. Kristin graduated from UW-Madison in 2006 with degrees in economics and business and founded Irrational Labs and Common Sense, as well as co-founding a lab at Google in behavioral sciences. But you want to hear her story from herself, so I'm not going to say any more about her. I'm going to invite her to come on up, and I'll just mention a housekeeping note. We're going to move to some Q&A after we hear from Kristin, and we are working with this fun catchbox microphone that I'll toss out, and we'll keep it tossing around between questions. But we do capture all of these. We record all of these, so we do ask you to ask for the mic and get the mic when we get to the Q&A. But with no further ado, I would love to welcome Kristin.
Okay. Thanks, guys, for taking your Friday afternoon and hanging out. I hope it'll be enjoyable. One thing we have to do is switch to the other slide deck. Great. This is why I get really... Okay, there we go. Wonderful. Is there a way... Actually, do we have a moving microphone? Is there a... possible that I could do that? I'll start here, but then would great to be... moving around, jumping. Okay, so this man's name is Todd Rogers. If you don't know Todd Rogers, he is a Harvard professor of behavioral economics. Very, very renowned man who has done well for himself. And this man was greeting people at a conference. He was there. Everyone was kind of coming up to him. And I came up to him and said, hello. And he says, I'm Todd. And I said, I know. And in his eyes, he's like, you know when you get that thing where somebody else knows your name but you don't, and you're like, oh God, what am I gonna do? And then it dawns on him, and he's like, oh, you're Kristin, the one who snuck her way into the field, the one who doesn't have a PhD. And at that moment I froze. I was like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. This man knows who I am. He doesn't think highly of me because I don't have a PhD. And then he follows it up with like, you hustled your way in. And I then my shoulders went back, and I was like, yeah, that's right. Like, there was no defined path for me to get into this field of behavioral economics. I could have gotten a PhD. Most people get a PhD, and somehow I found myself in this field doing pretty cool stuff. So I founded a Duke lab called Common Sense, which helps low to moderate income with save more, spend less. Founded a nonprofit called Irrational Labs. Does health, wealth, and happiness, and then co-founded a lab at Google. Kind of throughout all of that, have worked with really cool companies from Facebook, Eli Lilly, Kiva, Google, Fidelity. Kind of the list is really incredible. We've done research with tens of thousands of participants. Common Sense has worked with over 50 partners, kind of getting to the 60. Fintech, credit unions, nonprofits, World Bank. And so my journey is definitely not a typical one. You don't find many people in my field without a PhD. And so I'm kind of excited to share some of the ins and outs of how this came to be and also some of the learnings. And that's actually what I'll just preface this with is like, I'm going to share some of the way I got to what I'm doing, but these are all learnings in hindsight. So you look back and you say, aha, of course that happened and why. And so I think you don't ever really get these learnings at the time of doing it. And so this is maybe one of the learning opportunities for us is to take the time to reflect. And putting this presentation together was actually very helpful. Okay, so I started actually, sorry, do we have a mic or a thing so I can just move around? Thank you. Okay. Sorry, guys. There we are. Okay. So I started this. Oh, are we there? Okay. So I had a company in college called Net Nerds. This was like at the point where people didn't know how to fix their routers. So you had a router. You'd move into your dorm. or your apartment after your dorm or your sorority house, and you'd freak out because the first day you just had no idea what to do. You did not have internet. And so I realized this and hired what I called nerds at that point. I couldn't fix the computers, but they could. And so they'd go to people's sorority houses, apartments, complexes, and just fix computers. I realized pretty quickly I was in over my head, so petitioned John Eckert at the business school to get into a class of his, because I was only a sophomore. I found that basically this experience was incredibly insightful for many reasons. Number one, I figured out that I could break rules. So basically, I think starting something is the first time you basically are forced to like break a rule, right? So rules I broke, I flyered where you should not flyer. I got the email list. So at this point, I don't know if this is public knowledge, but UW was selling emails of students for $50. So I got the mass email list of all UW students and mass emailed them. Not ethically great, but legal. And a lot of it was just being pretty scrappy, going into apartment complexes and knocking on the door and bugging the apartment manager to try to get in there to do service. And I think kind of that 4 years of basically feet on the street with net nerds kind of really set the scene for later in life of basically figuring out you could break rules and make up your own story. The problem with anyone has a college business here? Or you do? Great. So the problem with college businesses is that the turnover is really high. So you have basically, 4 years of a student, but every year you're basically retraining people on what your business is. And then they leave for 3 months and you have to go do it again. And so there were some problems with college businesses, as well as I wasn't too passionate about computer service. So the reason that I got into net nerds in the first place was because it was like, a problem to solve, but not because I cared about computer service. And so through that, basically, had a decision to make. And this is, I think, something when you start anything or have a job, you basically say, you could just continue on in the status quo, and I could have continued on with net nerds. Life is easy when you continue on in the status quo, but at some point you kind of have to make a decision. So I had a decision, my first job out of college, I had a decision to make, and it was either a consulting job, Accenture, in Chicago, or I could go to Intuit on the West Coast. So this is a fairly important decision. How does one make this decision? Like this decision basically will kind of set whatever you do after college sets the trajectory for a lot of other things in life. How does one make this decision? Any ideas? Coin flip, yeah. Close your eyes, get on a plane. Weather, yeah. So there are a lot of things that we should consider when we're making this decision. Weather is definitely one of them. Lifestyle is another one. So when I was moving to San Francisco, or when Intuit was in San Francisco, what do you talk about at cocktail parties in San Francisco is tech, right? Everybody's on their phones. It would be a very different conversation starter if I was in Chicago, right? Where you're potentially doing like dodgeball after work. People in San Francisco don't do dodgeball, they don't eat cheese curds. It's pretty much a tech culture. Very different lifestyles I was signing up for. Another thing was commute. So I should have looked at commuting, right? Commuting has one of the biggest impacts on our happiness. I was gonna have to go 45 minutes down to Intuit a day. That's a big lifestyle hit. And should have looked at mating possibilities. So if you think about kind of your young female going off, where are my best possibilities? And if I were to look at this, I'd basically see that, Chicago didn't really stack up. San Francisco had many more male to female ratio. It was much better. As soon as I moved there, I realized that they were mostly engineers, so it doesn't count particularly. But how did I actually make this decision? I just looked at the money. So San Francisco was offering $9,000 more. Intuit was offering $9,000 more than Chicago. If you know anything about cost of living, that is nothing, right? Bread in San Francisco is 3x than Chicago. Any ideas on what the average cost of an avocado toast is currently in San Francisco? This is a real question. Yeah, it's around $10 to $11. Yeah. So this is it's a nice avocado toast, but that's a price you're paying for moving for making this decision. And so I did what is called the money illusion. I just looked at X versus X plus 9,000 in this case. And this is for a fairly important decision in my life, right? Like this is not, I had all the information available to me. There's no reason why I would have to use a heuristic here. And so I think this is one of the first times, as looking in hindsight, I really realized kind of, how excited I was about decision making and how flawed our decision making can be, not just for the little decisions, where we click on a screen, but also for the big decisions in our life. This, by the way, is not abnormal. So there's research from George Lowenstein at Carnegie Mellon that basically suggests we do the same thing with houses. So you should basically look at a house and say, like, what are my preferences? Do I like school districts? How actually do I want to live? What's the commute, et cetera, et cetera. And what do? We basically look at the price compared to where we came from. And so if you're moving from an expensive city, you're actually going to buy a more expensive house than if you're moving from a cheap city to the same city. So, going from Alabama to Pittsburgh, you're basically going to a more expensive city, so you're going to buy a cheaper house. No relation to your preferences, just really a relative decision. So this is a general insight that basically stuck with me through life, is that we make a lot of mistakes in our decision making. And a lot of the system can correct for this, so it wasn't that I lacked information. Okay, but in hindsight, what it looks like, basically, I founded a company in Wisconsin. Now I'm going out to San Francisco. This was a nice article that came out. I was like, this is not as strategic as it sounds, right? That I was like, now going to go out into the valley and start other things. I went to Intuit. So Intuit actually is a really nice place for grads to land, especially from Wisconsin. They recruited all these other Ivy League schools, and somehow Wisconsin got into the mix. And it was wonderful, right? So I was a undergrad graduate and running, I launched their first Quicken mobile product. So first SMS product, was a PM at QuickBooks Online for their backend API services, and also was a PM by the way is product manager, not project manager. So was thinking about how do you develop and design products. At Quicken. So Quicken Online was the pre-mint financial software. So this is probably how it still looks. But one day I'll tell this story and kind of again bring it back to kind of how and why I got interested in what I'm doing now. If you're a product manager, one of the main things that you do is talk to customers, right? You basically say, I'm gonna really deeply understand what people want. And if you're a product manager at a large company, sometimes you don't do that, and the CEO comes and says, you must do something. And in this case, this is actually what happened. We were a product team on Quicken Online, and they said, you know what, this Mint product over there, which is another personal finance tool that's doing really well, looks really cool. It looks pretty visually appealing, so why don't you guys go and build a pie chart that shows everybody where your money's going? And we're like, that's a pretty great idea, basically showing us visually where we're spending our money. And so, the CEO says to do it, we agreed, and we spent basically 2 weeks kind of trapped, as a product team would. There was design going on, there was engineering scoping, I was talking to customers. We're designing this wonderful product. We're very proud of ourselves, as people are after they sink a lot of work into something. And we brought customers into the lab. Intuit has basically a two-way mirror, so you could watch people as they go through your product. And so I remember the first time that we were actually doing this, people were sitting, going through, they were really looking at their own money. So they were basically going to use our product with their own money and look at how visually appealing, this view of their expense management was. And we were watching, the first one comes, and we were shocked, they covered their eyes. So they literally just put their hands to their face. And we're like, this person, it's just one. It's not gonna stick, it's just one. And then we bring in another person, and they do the same thing. And it keeps going. And so our team at that point was just shocked. We're like, we spent so long building this new fancy, very visual, by the way, this was very visually appealing for 2008. This looked pretty hot, pretty slick. Building this tool, and people didn't like it. And so the question we asked ourselves afterwards was like, how could we get this so wrong? So from a behavioral science perspective, the answer now just seems so obvious, how we could get this so wrong. Because what is this actually, this pie chart? This is just showing you all the money that you're losing. What is a main principle of behavioral science? Loss aversion. We don't like to lose things. In fact, we hate to lose things. And so what we did is make loss of money, one of the things we value the most, extremely clear, obvious, and hard to avoid. Obviously, people will put their eyes over their, hands over their eyes, right, to avoid this. But this is really funny that the CEO and a team of product people couldn't figure this out. How is it that we didn't know that this would happen? So basically, I was pretty depressed and sad and basically questioning all of what we knew about customer development in the product world, right? So you say, we can't get this right. We're a bunch of smart people, or we think we're smart people, and we fail at something like this. And that's when I met, Dan Ariely. So anyone heard of Dan Ariely? So Dan is a author at that time. He just released his book, Predictably Irrational. He's also a Duke professor. And pretty prolific around when it comes to research around human behavior. And so Dan came to talk to Intuit, and I was like, oh, wow. If only, right? If only we could understand understand how people actually behave versus how they say they behave. So if I listened to Dan, I was like, this is it. I really want to get involved in this stuff. But it turns out the way that I started, which is still true, is you needed a PhD in order to get into the field of behavioral economics. And I knew that basically if you go to get a PhD, you're expected to go into academia and be a professor. There's really no path to get a PhD and come back out to industry, nor did I want to spend the 5 years studying one issue. So I just asked him, basically, I remember actually sitting down and writing this email, and I asked him, how can I help you? And I was like, it's probably something where he just won't respond. He's a very busy man. He just did a New York Times bestseller. I'm just this Intuit PM, trying to learn. And he responded within the hour, and I subsequently learned that's just how he responds. I thought I was very special. And he said, let's talk on the phone. And we talked on the phone, and that actually started a 2-year relationship of me just helping him. So on the side of my Intuit job, and I subsequently quit and went to another startup called Lightro, I just helped Dan. Helping meant kind of some event planning. So together we launched this Startuponomics, which was, I think, and probably for 10 years, was the biggest conference bringing startups and behavioral economists together. I sat in on a lot of topics when he'd go to Intel and help the HR people redesign their incentive program. So here was just I think, and maybe this is, I'm relating it back, or maybe it's just, hindsight bias of kind of some of this net nerd stuff. I was trained to just try something, right? And not have as much fear or inhibition around what I could do. So Dan and I worked on the side for a couple years. I went to a camera company called Lightro. This was another lesson in, it was wonderful to basically see a camera company from start to finish, because it didn't go that well for Lightro. But I came on board, I was their first product manager, and tried to design this wonderful revolutionary camera. At the end, when we weren't selling cameras, I moved to international marketing, realized I didn't like selling cameras. And this is probably one of my biggest learnings about myself, was that I didn't like doing something, and so I didn't try. And so I was laid off. Now, a week later, the whole company was laid off, but it didn't feel the same. They decided a little bit, uneven. And so, I think this was basically kind of like, oh shit, when I'm not excited about something, it doesn't go well for me. So I'm really upset because, Lightro's not going well. I'm still helping Dan Ariely on the side, but it's not really, am I really gonna go get a PhD? I went through that whole thought process again. And lo and behold, what happened is that Dan gave me a call, kind of like 2 days after the Lightro incident happened, and asked me if I wanted to lead the behavioral economics team at Google. And this to me was like, oh wow, how is this happening? But the reality is I'd apprenticed with this man for 2 years, right? It wasn't necessarily just kind of a luck thing. It was like, actually I'd worked for free for somebody training for 2 years to do this thing that was actually no other PhD could do. So there's not a PhD in the world that could be plunked down into a highly, type A culture like Google and succeed at trying to get people to apply a completely new science to change how they do research.
So again, in hindsight, I trained a lot for this, but it did feel a lot like luck. So Dan and I, when we were at Google, we basically, we actually brought Startuponomics to Google. They're still doing it. This is the 2008 or 19 website for, or 2008, 2018. So we did things like train Googlers. We helped self-driving cars figure out what would happen in the first crash. We worked with AdWords to try to get small businesses to make more money with their ads. We worked with Google Apps to try to help people basically not have so much email. So we got to do a variety of things that really kind of ingrained more of this, how do you use the science of behavioral economics, which is insights on human behavior, in a real product process. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. So while Dan and I were at Google, we also basically decided to do a little nonprofit together called the Rational Labs. And this basically was trying to systematize all the stuff that we were learning. So we're working with a lot of teams. I would say at that point, the field of behavioral science is pretty new. And so you didn't actually have academics coming out of the lab and working with companies. So we really had no framework to teach anybody all the insights. So you think about all of the biases that we have, from norms to information aversion to optimism bias. There's so many biases that afflict us. How the heck are we going to bring all of those into the product world and help people actually apply them? So when Dan and I formed this company, we basically came up with a few frameworks to help people do this. One is the 3 Bs. This is now being used at Facebook, at Intuit, at the World Bank, to try to basically make a process towards applying, what really messy process. And it's very simple. It's just you take, it's behavioral economics, so you have to focus on a behavior. That's the first B. And then you reduce the barriers and you increase the benefits. We can, if you guys are interested later, we can go more over what that is. But it was a nice observation. I think, you always have some of these imposter syndromes of you're really not supposed to kind of be where you are. And I think without a PhD, I go through that a lot. But the reality is a lot of the stuff we were doing is breaking ground of, most of the product people still today treat consumers and customers like we're very rational, right? We build products that assume we're very rational and we make decisions based on time and money. And behavioral science says that's not at all true. We make decisions for a lot of other reasons, and those should all be incorporated into the product development process. Okay, and then I'll land where I am today, which is basically common sense. So Dan Ariely and I were doing a lot of work together, and it was just across the board. So we were, we helped Netflix, Lyft, Fidelity, and there was no systematic theme to the work that we were doing. And I think that's kind of a general lesson. You can do a lot, but if you don't feel like you're doing one big thing, at the end of the day, you wake up and you say, I've done a lot, but I really haven't moved any mountains. And so we were looking to basically figure out what mountain we could move. With my background at Quicken, and he did a lot of psychology and money research, we decided to raise money for financial well-being. So financial health. As you may know, there's a financial health crisis in America. We have around 40% of Americans who say they can't get $400. If you look at retirement savings between 50 and 55, it's $8,000 is the median amount. So, and it hasn't gotten that better. So even though our macroeconomic stats are looking good these days, those stats around savings and people living paycheck to paycheck are not improving. So 3 years ago, we raised money from MetLife Foundation, around $9 million, to basically go into fintech companies, banks, credit unions, governments, and try to nudge people to do something a little differently. So I'll give you an example. We went into a credit union and tried to get folks who were about to cash their check to save a little money, right? So if you are typically, or if you're probably not getting any direct deposit or you're underbanked, you're gonna get a check. And when you walk up to the teller, you're just gonna give them the check and they're gonna give you a wad of cash. The question is, can we get anybody to save some of that money? Now, if you are a typical researcher, what do? You sit people down, you ask them questions, tell me why you're not saving, tell me what features I can build, what are you saving for? And we interrogate people and we ask them these questions. As a behavioral scientist, the process we've developed is basically, I don't care about how you feel about savings, because if savings is difficult, it's less likely you're going to do it anyway. So you could love savings, but if there's 10 steps to do it, you're just not going to do it, right? And so our team basically goes through a process where we look at all the small steps that are in somebody's way to do a behavior, and then we identify what of those steps is causing friction or has a bias that is preventing us from taking the action. So when you go into a bank next time, you can be very aware of what the friction is to cashing a check. Anyone want to take a guess at what the friction is to cashing a check? Fraud? Not at this point, but could be. Anyone? Standing in line, yes. So you have to stand in line to cash your check, and if you want to save, you can't get in line because you need to fill out a form. You need to fill out a deposit slip. You have to go and you have to fill out this deposit slip. All the while people are getting in line in front of you, right? And then you go and with your check and you hand it to the teller. Now, when we think about the small things in life, it's just a form. How can people not be able to fill out this form? But reflect on if you guys have any magazines you haven't canceled, or subscriptions, or junk mail in your mailbox you haven't unsubscribed from, right? It's these little things that get in our way and prevent us from doing something even though we kind of want to. So what our team did is just tried to make it a fair fight. So it's not that people don't want to save, or they may not want to save, but we don't know. Right now it's hard to tell if they just don't want to fill out a form or they don't want to save money. So we basically require that if you are going to just go cash your check, that you actually also fill out a form. So now at the point you're walking into the bank and it doesn't matter if you're saving or not, you still have to fill out a form. You could put 0, that's 100% okay. But we're just going to make it a fair fight between the action that you'd want to do otherwise and the action that you may do because it's a path of least resistance. So we got around 10% of people to save, and on average, they saved around $170. So you say maybe 10% isn't that much, but man, it's a form. That's all we did, right? There was no other intervention except changing the form. And $170 is a fair part of that $400 that people can actually pull out. And they were doing it at every paycheck. So those are the types of thinking, and that's kind of the behavioral science lens, is we don't necessarily look at the world like everyone else does. It says, I need to convince you, and I need to shake you on the shoulder and say, please do the thing I want you to do. We really look at kind of the small details in the environment to determine how do we hack the environment to change behavior. So I think, so actually, and then the next thing in my journey will be, I'm actually leaving Common Sense at the end of the month. We raised another $12 million for the next 4 years, but I'm excited to basically expand scope. So a lot of the work we do with Common Sense is just savings wallets, so it's just helping people save. And as soon as you get more into the nonprofit world of financial well-being or any kind of poverty alleviation, you're like, oh, there are so many root causes, right? The theory of change is massive. And so basically Irrational Labs will restart that, and will kind of be broad from basic income experiments to working in Mexico internationally to help kids and mothers. So that could either be a very entrepreneurial, in hindsight, I don't know what will happen. That could either be a very entrepreneurial decision or a very stupid one. We will see. And so I think at this point, I could do a lot more stories on the behavioral economics findings that we've had. So that's, I can do that, or we can take questions. Up to you guys. We'll sit in silence for a little bit.
Also more stories.
Okay, yeah, I can do either or. Yeah, go on. Fear motivation, yep. So, so the question was basically, I'll repeat, was fear motivation, which I think more along the lines of kind of loss aversion, which is basically a company saying, don't do something or you will lose it, which invokes this kind of like fear in us and say, I know I don't want to do that. We think about fear and motivation, or this loss aversion, or any tactic that it has you have that visceral reaction, as being really good to motivate a one-time behavior. So if I want you to go sign up for something that you never have to do again, then I want to use some fear or some motivation in order to get you to do it. That kind of nudge doesn't work on a systematic, ongoing basis. So I can't do that to you every time that you come into the bank, or I can't do that to you every time that I want you to not eat a salad because I'm going to put up some scary sign. But I can do it to you a few times. So for instance, there's a nice research paper out there around getting people to eat less sugar or drink less sugary drinks. And so they basically said, I'm not going to teach people about sugary drinks, but at the point of decision at the cashier or where they're grabbing it, I'm going to show viscerally and graphically the effects of what happens when you have too many sugary drinks. So when you're overweight and on a medical system. So they scare people, right? They say, don't do this because this could be you. And so on a one-time factor, this helps. And it was at a hospital, so people aren't coming in and out. Like it's not that you're there forever. So you have people coming once or twice to the cafe, not on a sustained basis. So this actually dramatically decreased the sales of sugary beverages and increased the sales of water. But should we be doing that on a normal basis in the normal cafe that you go to? It's just going to wear off. It's not going to work. Oh, I don't know if that sort of answered your question. Say more. Self-care.
Yeah, I mean.
Yep. Right.
So
right.
Because.
Yep.
So I was.
Yeah.
So they're not driven by a fear, but they're more driven by, oh, that's something, this place I would like to go and grow, or, oh, there's some real benefits for me there. So they're motivated in a positive direction rather than away.
We don't really see that much. We don't see that people are kind of going towards the challenge or because they understand inherently the good benefit that comes from this. That's a really rational thing. And so if you give people a lot of time to make a decision, things like that can happen, right? Because you're using system 2 or a more rational kind of flow. As soon as people are making quicker decisions, then fear is actually something we reject. And if you have longer, you may say, I want to be somebody who embraces that fear because it's good for me. But that doesn't come in the typical decision making that we have on a day-to-day basis. Or I haven't had any research examples of that. It may, and they just may not be researched.
Hey, Kristen, I come from an environmental background, and so in the world of trying to change environmental behaviors, social norms are a really big kind of overarching reason or strategy. Are there overarching reasons that you've found that change people's saving behavior, their financial, the way they think about their finances?
Yeah.
Like what are kind of some of the corollaries?
Yep. I think so norms are still one. So basically, in America, we see spending, we don't see savings. Right? I see everybody going out to eat, buying nice purses. I see nothing, I don't know what my family saves. I don't know what my friends save. There's no visceral thing where I get congratulated when I pay down debt. Right? There's nothing like that. So I'd say norms is still, we haven't had a successful intervention with norms. So our team did something where we put people through a little app. They were at a bank, and you typed in how much you spend on eating out. We helped you do this estimate, and then if you were eating out more than others, we kind of gave you a norming thing that says you're eating out more than your peers in Arizona. It was an Arizona thing. We made you feel a little bad, and then we had you pre-commit to what you would do to fix that, and it worked for a week. So we had people reduce spending on eating out, $17, non-trivial, $17 for a week. And then it went back to normal. And so I think that's also what energy finds, is that basically you can get a spike, and then it goes down, because when you increase someone's motivation one time, unless they're locking themselves into future behaviors, you have to then continue to increase that motivation to do something differently. So it's a continual game. The other thing with savings and financial health is just friction. So like, right now it's 4 clicks to do any kind of automatic transfer from if I want to set up automatic transfers at the top 5 banks, it's like hidden in menus. And this is the best way for people to kind of set and forget their finances. And then, that we're basically kind of ancient in the financial health world. Like, we're relying on budgeting. Like, the health world has given up calorie counting a long time ago, right? Budgeting is just calorie counting. Like, we know people can't do calorie counting, or if they can only do it for a short period of time, and then they give it up. And the only language we have in financial health for any kind of expense management is just budgeting. It's crazy. So I think friction and norms still exist, or still are big.
I just wanted to hear more about your future plans and addressing financial instability and basic income, et cetera.
Yeah. So we're going to still work with, so a lot of the work we do at Common Sense now, I'll continue to do with the Rational Labs, but more at a thesis-driven manner. So basic income is one. Currently, there's a lot of talk in the media around basic income. The reality is we have not done a reputable RCT in the world. There's currently one going on with Give Directly in Kenya. There's been multiple attempts at good RCTs. There has not been one. And so I think it's ripe for research to come along. Next week I'm meeting with the Stockton Development Program. They're doing a sample, but it's 100 people. Oakland's doing 1,000. And so at least we can learn something from observations of, if you just give money to people, how are they mentally accounting for it? What are the types of limits or not limits, asset limits, that are placed on this? And so there's a lot to learn, but also just we want to place ourselves in a position to be in the next RCT. So Chicago is doing one, and we're hoping to involve in that.
I just wanted you to elaborate on that. What kind of methodologies do you use in your research? Are RCTs the only thing that RCTs and experiments, or is there something?
Yeah. RCTs and A/B testing is kind of the gold standard for behavioral science. So that is, I think, actually probably the main differentiator between the field and, let's say, economics. Like economics, you look at a data set and you try to make observations and correlations about people, and they can be predictive, but they're just in the past. And so what we do is basically say, let's control the environment and have 3 conditions. One does this, one does this, one does this, and they're all small changes. So that is our, I'd say 80% of the experiments we do are RCTs. The other thing we do that I think is very nice is surveys and studies. So we're very quick at basically saying, how can we make it so that it feels real for people? Maybe it's a little animation, and we have 3 different animations that people look at, and then we measure how people respond differently to those 3 different animations. So behavioral science kind of doesn't believe in, I don't believe in kind of the market study that just asks you, how do you feel about this new product coming out? Because we have no idea if it's good or bad. Life is relative. And so you could have done something that's a lot worse or a lot better, and we have no idea. So a lot of our research methods are just how do we get a relative understanding of how you would view this or do something. So you could also do that with a survey or like a survey study and ask people, but most of it's field experiments.
I have a question. How did you come up to speed in this field? So you didn't get a PhD, but did you spend time studying the literature, or was there an intermediate path that you felt would be valuable to give you that credential? It sounds like you just plunged in, but you seem like an expert. So did you study a lot, or how did you do that?
I think over the 2 years, I think a few things. One, the major one, if again hindsight bias, was being in every single meeting with Dan Ariely. So he's the leading expert in this field, and not only leading experts with companies, so taking the science and knowing when it does and doesn't work in contextual situations. So I tried to, at one point, map out, my life was just pattern matching. and then reading. So I read a lot of academic studies of all the books, went to a lot of conferences. So I knew all the PhDs who were doing some of this work. So a lot of it was like brute force. But if I were to say, like, I don't think brute force could get people the education that just like working with an expert can. And that's, by the way, how the people on our team got into it as well. So there's no way for most people to get in. So Evelyn Gosnell, who's our lead researcher, worked with Ayala Kenizi. Wendy DeLarosa worked with Adam Grant. So a lot of times you're just actually, by force going up to a professor and saying, help me.
This is the fun one. So one of the things that entrepreneurs always run into is the status quo bias and people not wanting to change and accept their new product. Both from your experience and maybe some examples, are there some key steps or rules of thumb that you'd recommend for entrepreneurs to get people off the status quo and try their new product, new idea?
Yeah, I think this hits a nail on the head. Yes, I think status quo bias is probably the worst thing. And I think from a personal perspective, it's what I personally fight against. So I live with 11 people, and our motto is mutually assured non-complacency. Because it's so easy to go on your life doing the same things that you continue to do, and disrupting it is always going to be harder and riskier. So I think this is the problem to solve. The one thing we do when we have an experiment like this is we force people off the status quo. So basically, imagine you're launching a new product within a company, you actually would want to launch it at a stopping point where they have to choose between two things. So I wouldn't, you can basically try to beg people to change, but what you'd want is whatever partner distribution to have them say, no, it's a stopping point. We're going to de-enroll you from everything, or you can't actually use this again, and you have to choose, from one of these options. So I think that's ideal. The other thing is that people don't really understand the counterfactual. So like, we're not counterfactual thinkers. We just say, this is what I'm doing, and we don't see all of the options, the other things we could be doing. So imagine you're an entrepreneur, you're launching a new product. How do people actually know what to value it? So the example we give it, so you definitely know how much a donut costs. You know what a newspaper costs. Maybe you know what a flight from Wisconsin to Chicago costs, but you don't know what something like a night over at Alcatraz costs. Or a weird celebrity date that's videoed. Like, what? Like, do I want that? Do I not? The variance is so high. And so a lot of times when people are launching these new products, we say, compare it to something that people know. Give them the counterfactual of what they're already doing. Count up the hours they're spending. Tell them it's the comparison is the paper way that they've done it. Or create more SKUs that are kind of fake SKUs so people understand that the world is worse right over on that side, and this is the side that you want to be on. So this is just called more of a forced choice. It's basically the same thing as the first one, you're just showing people all the options in front of them and basically getting us to understand the opportunity cost of not making the decision, or of staying on the current thing you're staying on. Opportunity cost is basically kind of what should drive us. So I have $3. Could I spend this $3 on coffee, or should I spend it on retirement? Like, this is the equation we should go through every single time we spend money or we spend time on something, but we don't. So like, if you can trigger an opportunity cost evaluation, then you're basically going to help people realize the value of their money or their time in a way that's outside of the status quo.
Okay.
All right. Hello, Kristin. Good to have you back in Madtown.
I didn't even see you back there.
Yeah, this might be a pretty meta question, but I'm interested in how you might use behavioral economics to help people learn and develop their skill and knowledge in behavioral economics. Because a lot of times when people do trainings or workshops, people may not retain very much, learn very much, do very much. How might you apply behavioral economics to help have better outcomes from training people on behavioral economics?
Yeah. So I'll tell you what we just did. We just did 2 workshops in New York. One was 3 hours in the morning, one was 3 hours in the evening. We took 20 minutes before we ended, and we had people do 3 things. One was recall. So a lot of this is just the game of memory and learning is recall, because you can ingrain something in your mind. And so we actually force people to do recall. What are the top things that you learned? Why did you like them? And so by doing that, you ingrain. The second thing was actually emailing a person on their team that wasn't in the room the thing that they were going to do differently using behavioral science. So some sort of action, but tied to an accountability. And then the other thing was this public commitment to actually take it back, and they would stand up and pledge. So that's more about doing. It's not about learning. But I think the main thing with behavioral science is kind of like any other thing. You have to practice it, so you can theoretically know loss aversion. You can theoretically know social proof. What we find happens with most people as soon as they do like one workshop is they see it everywhere. So they're like, oh, wow, this is happening. And you see your world completely differently. And I think until people start doing that, they don't really understand how the environment, because the main thesis of behavioral science is the environment affects our decision making. So as soon as you start seeing that the environment affects your decision making, you're starting to learn around how you can then change the environment to help people. That'd be my takeaway. Darren, you know much more about learning, so.
That was awesome.
Another one then.
Yeah.
If you mentioned kind of your learning about behavioral economics, are there specific books or blogs or papers that you would recommend to someone who's interested in the topic that wants to get up to speed?
Yeah, I get asked this a lot. So I have an Excel sheet that I can send of all the like top books and the podcasts and the articles. So I think that's one. I don't have a particularly, I think Predictably Rational is probably the best in class for getting a like easy read where you understand the key biases that people have. And like Thinking Fast and Slow is great. It turns out actually a lot of those studies don't replicate because it was small sample sizes. But it's still a really nice exercise in changing how you frame the world in front of us. We wrote this Hacking Human Nature for Good, which maybe that's what we did to try to teach people, which is 9 workbooks. And so they're on our website at Rational Labs, but like they're just, goes through social proof and says, here are the top 3 studies of social proof, and here's a question that a practitioner should answer. And then it's like, here's the top studies of loss aversion, here's the questions a practitioner should answer. Incentives, identify a victim. And it's hard to recommend that because it's too simple, right? So if you want to, so a lot of that is probably doing that and then figuring out where you're most interested. But we are putting together I may have mentioned this, so part of my like new thing, we're gonna try to solve that problem. We have a 9-week boot camp that will launch in January that'll put people through a much more intensive program. So and it's really designed for people who are in a corporation doing something for good, helping, like ARP wants to help all these seniors save money. Let's take 2 people and train them. So they're not gonna get a PhD, and train them on how to think about this problem. And so we'll launch that in 2019.
Is that gonna be online?
It'll be 2 in-person sessions in San Francisco and the rest remote. Yeah.
Could you say more about your international work in Mexico, helping moms and children?
Well, we're actually pitching for a grant for this, but so AXA is an insurance company, and they have partnerships in Mexico government that are going to get us into the hospital system to help mothers. Basically, you're at a much higher risk of diabetes if you're pregnant. And that is something preventable, or at least you could put that off for much longer. And if a mother has diabetes, then the weight of the child is affected. So we're going to do probably spend 6 months. It's close to being finished, so I shouldn't count my grants before we have them. But we'll spend 6 months kind of going back and forth learning about the environment. So learning about the system, the hospital system, the touch points that people have, the mothers have, more home life. So what does the refrigerator look like? And is that different than in the US or in the rural places that we'll go? So for this we'll actually usually in the US we know a lot about the problem, so we can have a very short behavioral diagnosis thing. But if you're in rural Mexico with pregnant mothers, So we'll spend about 6 months doing our diagnosis there, hopefully in January. That kicks off.
Ordinarily, we have a brief network or an informal networking reception at 5, but they haven't finished setting it up yet. So I'm going to ask you some more questions, and then at 5, if people are interested, you can. I don't know if you can hang out, Kristen, but you're welcome to have some popcorn and get a drink and hang out a little bit more. Listening to you, I haven't heard the usual entrepreneurial stories of failure and frustration. I've heard nothing but you did this, you were plucky, you've been successful, incredibly successful. Are there failures and frustrations that you just skipped right over that it might be beneficial to hear about?
I think getting fired from Lytro sucked.
Fair enough.
Yeah, so I think that really sucked. The really like pick my head up thing was like, I'm like, what do? I don't want to do another startup. I want to do this behavioral science thing. I'm not going to get a PhD. And I went to like go help other founder. Like I immediately tried to figure it out, and I think that was also probably a mistake. Like I immediately got a consulting job and and so yeah, I think that was a big down. Leaving Intuit, so I pitched Intuit on working with Dan and taking a sabbatical for 3 months. So I got like Scott Cook, the founder, to say yes. And he couldn't, this I guess not how the corporation works, but the GM, Dan Warnikoff, I'll tell you a story about Dan in a second. Dan Warnikoff said no. And so I basically had a decision to make of like, was I gonna stay at Intuit or get on with my life? And I think this was actually it was a bummer because I had Dan Ariely write a letter, talk to Scott Cook. I'd done all of the chess moving pieces, and then now I'm stuck at Intuit. And not any, and so the question there was like, should I go back and should I go get a PhD? And I was like, no, I think actually probably the advice people give entrepreneurs is too much to quit and do something full time. And so I was like, I don't think that's smart advice yet. Like, I'm not an expert. I had been working with Dan for a while by that time, but like, I'm not an expert at this stuff. And so I was like, I'm going to go and do it on the side and continue this like journey of like my passion, just on the side of what I did. Turns out that actually it was a beautiful story with Dan Warnikoff. So Scott Cook, like 2 months ago, emails Dan Warnikoff as the head of TurboTax at Intuit and says, you must talk to Kristen as the expert in behavioral science. And it was like, oh, this is a wonderful little loop of like, Dan wouldn't let me do this behavioral science thing. I did it. I'm sure he doesn't remember, right? It's probably was a blip on his radar, but like for me, this was a very nice full circle of something.
Any other last questions? Sure. Can I toss it to you?
So kind of on that note, a lot of interesting stories that sounded like successes, and I was wondering if there are any behaviors that you wanted to change or understand but remain mysterious, and what do you do when you encounter that, where you just keep investigating but can't figure it out?
Yeah, I don't have a morning routine. So if you're a behavioral scientist and you want to create a habit, I should be able to create a habit. That's my self-talk. And I can't, I haven't, all these like things. And I think I haven't cracked that nut. And I then reflect like we haven't cracked that nut as society to figure out how to do something on a daily habitual basis. And so basically this has been kind of a long affliction of mine, is trying to figure this out. And kind of got to the point where I'm like, and I have this piece of like, fuck habits. Like, why are we trying to create something that you do every single day? Why won't we try to create something you do once and it's then done for the whole time? Like, why aren't we trying to simplify our lives in this way? So I'll give you an example. If I want to walk more, I should buy a dog. It's a one-time decision. I will walk every day and I will enjoy it. It's wonderful, right? Same with savings. Nonprofits are like, let's create a savings habit. It's like, no, like just set automatic savings deposits in a way that doesn't make people overdraft. Even a way that you could approve or not approve, but the default is to change it or to have savings. So I basically have moved from saying like I should create a habit or other people should create a habit to much more of a mental model that says life is really difficult. Why would I want to do something every day? So you can't solve that for everything. So I'm not saying that, like meditation, very difficult. That's the point, is to do it every day. But most things you don't have to have a habit to do. And in fact, most companies want us to do habits because it increases logins to sell them ads. So we're basically, you have all these habit apps and like companies learning how to build habits. It's like that's their incentive. It doesn't have to be our incentive. Okay, I'll leave you with one other thing. So I tend to, I think generally we should evaluate most things in life with like a lens of not having the status quo. And so I think a challenge that I do most of the time is the thing that we do the most, which is talking, we're very bad at. So if you think about actually, and I'll put most of you under the bus today, I'm sure you've had multiple weather conversations. Weather is the least interesting thing that you could talk about. Now, I'm sure you want to bond with other people, and this is nice, and it's, this is great. It's just such a waste of time to build this into our conversation repertoire as much as we do. And so a lot of some of the work that I just finished was on no small talk experiments, where we did parties, and we basically forced people to talk about things that are more interesting. Things like, what do you want to do in 5 years? What was the lowest part of your week? Are you more like your mother or your father? So questions that you actually don't have the answer to. There's probably never a time when strangers ask you these questions and you really know what to respond. And we did that. We tried to do it force people to talk about the future. We did one where we forced people to talk about the past. And then we did one where there was no conversation hack and it was just an activity. So just a random activity. And so what we found is that basically the future and the past both perform better for connection, for helping you reveal more about yourself, for helping other people reveal more about themselves, and for the amount of people that you met and wanted to exchange information with. So basically, the takeaway there is that we thought maybe we'd find a finding between future and past, saying like, is it better to talk about your future self or your past self? And what we found is like, it doesn't matter as long as you talk about something interesting. Right? And so I think kind of the lens that we go about in life could be, how do I hack the things that are normally status quo? Okay, so that's my rant.
Thanks so much, Kristen. That was really fascinating. So we do have an informal networking reception. It's normally out there, but this, I don't know if any of you know, but this is the week of the Wisconsin Science Festival, and we have a ton going on, and so we're setting up for tomorrow already. So we have a little different space over to my left, right over here, where we have a table set up, and you're welcome to join and grab a beverage and have some snacks and continue the conversation. So thank you so much, Kristen. That was fascinating. Thank you.